Cynthia. I am with the Foothill Catalog Foundation. And so on behalf of the Foothill Catalog, Altadena Heritage, Altadena Heritage, the Altadena Historical Society, and the Bungalow Heaven Neighborhood Association, we want to welcome you back to Altadena Revealed. It's been a little bit since we've had our last lecture series, but if this is your first time here, this is a monthly lecture series that we host with the theme kind of being Altadena, and our community topics range from architecture, literature, art, science, you name it, because we have it all here, right? And it's all worth celebrating. And so this started back in, I believe, March of last year. And so it's been a really amazing thing for Alex and I at the Foothill Catalog, and just to meet everyone and work together to put these on for you guys. And this is actually the first one we're having here at the Eaton Fire Collaboratory, so thank you so much to the Eaton Fire Collaboratory, if anyone is here with them, for hosting us tonight. We were previously at the Altadena Main Library before they started their renovation project. And so I'll just keep it really brief and give you a preview of the next 3 months of Altadena Revealed programming. So next month, and generally these are held on the last Friday of the month. And so next month we are going to be featuring a conversation between Linnell George and Nikki High of Octavia's Bookshelf on Hill Ave. And they'll be speaking about Octavia Butler. And then the following month, our very own Hans here will be giving I'm sure, an amazing presentation on Zane Grey. And then the following month, Professor David Ziegler will be speaking about Caltech and JPL. So as you can see, just based on that preview, range of topics that we're really excited about. But now I'm going to hand it over to Hans, who's going to introduce our two speakers for the evening.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for being here. It's always wonderful to be in this room. I mean this sincerely when I say it. This is one of my favorite things that I do in Altadena. I love this committee, and I love these talks, and I love gathering with all of you. So thank you so much for being here. I also want to congratulate Alex and Cynthia. They had a beautiful wall-raising ceremony today. They've been doing so much amazing work in Altadena, and if we could give them a round of applause for everything they've done too. And one thing that was really, really touching about their wall-raising ceremony is that the theme of it was the power of home. And I think that we'll find in tonight's lecture that very same theme, the power of home, is really, really central. So I want to introduce our two speakers tonight. So we all know and love Michele Zack. I think we will also all come to know and love Michelle Huneven. Let me tell you a little bit about Michelle Huneven. She's a novelist. She's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. If you know, you know. Zane Grey didn't even graduate from the Iowa Writers Workshop. And she has taught creative writing at UCLA. She and Michele Zack have been neighbors in Altadena for over 20 years. They met on their first day of high school at John Muir. So we're celebrating a local novelist, but we're also celebrating a really, really lasting and enduring and beautiful friendship. But I want to say a little bit more about Michelle Huneven. In 2005, Michelle gives an interview to the LAists. And Michelle, I don't see you out there. Where are you? There you are. Do you remember this interview?
No.
No? So the first question Michelle is asked in this interview in 2005 is as follows. How long have you lived in Los Angeles, and which neighborhood do you live in? Here's what she said. I've lived in LA County 41 out of my 51 years. I grew up in Altadena and live in Altadena now. I spent some of my young adulthood in Pasadena in two different bungalow courts, a few blocks apart from each other. One of those bungalow courts was said to be the best example of Japanese Swiss-inspired craftsman architecture. So I want to show you that bungalow court. That's Rhineway Court. Anyone know Rhineway Court? Amazing. So Michele Zack also lived at Rhineway Court when Michelle was there. And about a year ago, before this lecture was even an idea, Michele Zack shared a photo with me from a party at Rhineway Court. And I want to share this photo with you. Here it is. By raising your hand, and only by raising your hand, for a complimentary membership to Altadena Heritage. Does anyone know who this happy fellow here is? Someone who's not a member of Heritage so they can get a free membership. That is T.C. Boyle. So T.C. Boyle was also living at Rhineway Court. You may know that today T.C. Boyle lives in a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Montecito, but there was a time when T.C. Boyle, Michelle Zack, and Michelle Huneven lived at Rhineway Court. And you can see that T.C. Boyle in the second photo is looking down to a table, and I want to show you what he's looking at. That's a cake. And the cake is decorated to reflect the cover of his latest book at the time, which was Budding Prospects in about 1985. And so if you've been back to have a refreshment tonight, you will have seen that we have a Bug Hollow cake. This is why we have a Bug Hollow cake. We want to celebrate Michelle as a novelist. We want to celebrate the friendship between the two Michelles, but we also want to continue and preserve beautiful traditions. And this is certainly one of them. So I want to read one more answer that Michelle gave. Let me change pages here. And this is where I think we have a resonance with the power of home, which was the theme of the Foothill Catalog's wall raising today. Here's the question. If you could live in any neighborhood or specific house in LA, which would you choose? And this is what Michelle said. And again, this is in 2005. This is just after she bought the home that she lived in up to the Eaton Fire and that she lost in the Eaton Fire. And these are her words about that house. When I bought this home, my first home here in Altadena, I was like a mother with a young baby, completely in love. I love my house with unswerving pride and devotion. You could show me a modernist masterpiece, a Mission Revival mansion, a coddled craftsman bungalow, and I would shrug with indifference. I had eyes only for my own 1,100 square foot stucco box. My fiance Jim bought that there's only one house nearby within full sight, and that's the identical twin house that shares my driveway. The two were built for brothers. My fiance Jim bought that house a couple of months ago, so we now have two small, architecturally insignificant 1953 homes and well over half an acre. We conceivably could sell both properties and buy, say, the Myron Hunt mansion around the corner, but we prefer not to. We like our own odd compound. Why is that? Maybe it's because we're right where we want to be. Maybe it's because we're right where we want to be. And I will tell you that being with these two women tonight and being with all of you is exactly where I want to be. So let me bring them up for you.
Thank you, Prince Hans. Thank you for being here tonight.
What a nice showing of Altadena and beyond.
So we're going to have a conversation tonight about Michelle's writing and why she has set so many of her, half of your novels, 3 of 6, Can everyone hear me? If you can't hear me, I want you to wave because I cannot stand to be at a program where you can't hear the speakers. So I don't want to be guilty. But I think we're going to start with Michelle doing a short reading just to give you a flavor, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Hans, for that beautiful introduction. I'm going to read from a book I've just started to write. And it's not only placed in Altadena, but it involves actual people in Altadena. So this first chapter is about when Elena Scripps Kellogg met Paul Popenoe. They fell in love. They did not get to marry, but this is just the very beginning. This is their cute meet. The chapter is called Elena. Elena Kellogg found men in her family disturbing. The hair on their hands, their scent of tobacco and meat, the creak of their hard leather shoes. Seated beside father or brother at dinner, she had a hard time eating. That girl, her father said, she is finicky like a cat. Men didn't notice her. She was small, fat-cheeked and buck-toothed, like a chipmunk. Her mother, Florence, also resembled a chipmunk, and Elena was a chip off the old monk. But the old monk had a fortune, so Elena's father had overlooked her looks. Paul Popenoe, was not so much like those men. He was neither hairy nor looming, but thin and tall and sweet-smelling, more like a slim sapling, a graceful bough. His face was round, still young and soft. He was quiet, a shell spiraling inward. He did not disturb. The Pasadena Star had sent him to the library tea, where he stood like a plant in the corner and took notes. Elena, too, was there observing. Mainly, she studied Fanny Gillette's sand dune face, as she'd been commissioned to paint it. Paul moved to stand behind the sofa. "Excuse me, please, miss," he said. "May I ask you some questions for the newspaper?" "Thank you. All right. Are you a library user? If so, how often do you come? And what books do you have checked out?" Elena said, "I visit the library every week in my pony cart. Spot enjoys the outing, as the way is largely level, and the librarian, Miss Jarvinen over there, the one in pink, gives him a carrot. The book I have out now is He That Will Not When He May. That is by Margaret Oliphant." "Is your cart the one with the flowers?" he said. "And is that pony with the black circle on his back the eponymous Spot? Then I have seen you and it, and all the children. I can't keep them out of it." "Impossible to," he said, "I would imagine." He was starveling thin. "Ah," she said, "would you care for some sandwiches? Any kind in particular? And some cake, perhaps? May I fetch you a plate?" Her parents had shipped Spot from Detroit because she'd missed him like a limb. She'd wanted to accompany him on the journey, but they sent Hiro, Matsuko's boy, who slept on the straw bales in the boxcar beside a slopping trough of water, and pitchforked Spot's soilings across the Great Plains, the Rockies, the Mojave. But she'd grown too tall. Sitting atop Spot, her feet scuffed the ground. So now Spot pulled. When Hiro brought out the cart, Spot snorted and frisked like a dog seeing the leash. He backed up between the poles, lowered his head for the harness. For the Rose Parade, she and Hiro had festooned the whole cart with flowers. She'd left on the 4 copper vases they'd nailed to the cart's sides, and Hiro kept them filled with camellias, roses, mums, whatever bloomed. "Dorothy," her sister said, "you are a spectacle, Ellen, at your age. It's pathetic, always reliving your moment of glory." Elena was 18 years old in this spring of 1910. Her mother said, "For someone so shy, you do call attention to yourself in that getup. The children love it." "You're the child who loves it," said Dot. You're an embarrassment. Yet not so embarrassing that Dot and the Mater didn't importune her and Spot when the Pater took the car to the city. Oh, Elena, drive us to the Macmillans, the Wiggins, to St. Mark's. Once they dismounted and Elena turned Spot toward home, the children ran up and clambered aboard, 3, 5, or more of them. They pulled petals off the flowers and flung them into the streets, a welter of blessings. Why not live in glory? For the rest of her long life, Elena Kellogg would love an open-air conveyance and equines.
So that was a bit of a sneak peek.
A sneak peek, yes, indeed.
And I don't know, for those of you who don't know, Michelle and I both live on the Pompano property. So this is hyper local journalism and writing, literary journalism and writing.
This is called not leaving your house to find your subject matter.
So, to start, I would say that your last novel, Bug Hollow, you dedicated to Altadena. So why did you do that?
Well, originally I dedicated it to my husband Jim, and then after the fires, he suggested that I dedicate it to Altadena. And I did it because I did it as an homage and really gratitude. I mean, I've loved living in Altadena, and Michelle and I, we walk up in the mountains. We walk up in the mountains 2-3 times a week, and so much of our conversation was like, how did we get so lucky? How did we get so lucky to end up with such nice husbands and houses and in such a beautiful place? Because we've known each other for so long, you know, we're just always counting our blessings. And this was a way to sort of count the blessing in public.
That's so amazingly sweet. So you grew up, literally, you were born in the Altadena Hospital that no longer exists. You went to school here. Can you just share just a few snippets of growing up here? I mean, and you also grew up in the civil rights movement, in the counterculture movement. So just give us a bit of your background from when you lived on El Nido Street.
Yes, how many people here even know where El Nido Drive is in Altadena? See, it's a best kept secret. My father moved to Altadena, to the corner of Harriet and Casitas, in 1923 when he was 8 years old with his family. They bought an acre of property. It had 48 orange trees on it, and they spent the first few years removing orange trees from the property. But there was still a big orange grove adjacent to it. And on the other side of that, there was the old home place, as they called it. There was the orange grove, and then there was a school designed by the architect Myron Hunt. Well, it was actually a living school. It was called a preventorium, and it was where the children of tuberculars could go so they wouldn't catch tuberculosis. It's now 5 acres. When I was growing up, it was a school for children with multiple sclerosis, which the whole neighborhood embarrassingly called the spastic school. They moved out at a certain point, I guess around maybe 1960 or so, and it became my own private playground. There was a grassy playground that had a merry-go-round, a seesaw, these beautiful swings that swung out over to JPL and the Arroyo. And when we got hungry, we would go and eat pomegranates and guavas that grew in abundance on the grounds. It was really a secret, beautiful place to live. So I grew up on El Nido Drive. I went to Franklin Elementary School, which I'm sorry to see half demolished. I went to Elliott Junior High, ditto, and I went to New York, where I met Michelle on the very first day.
So what drew you back? Because you did leave.
I did leave, indeed, and when I was growing up, I thought, I'm going to live in Rio de Janeiro, you know, I'm going to live in Budapest. I'm going to get as far away from my parents as I can get, the way the kids feel. And so I went to graduate school in Iowa, and I moved back to Rhineway Court, where Michelle was the court manager, and her husband Roger. And I lived there with her for a while, and I moved up to the Sierras for a few misbegotten years for love and whatever. And came back and lived in a court right around the corner from Rhineway called Bowen Court, or Garden Court, that was designed by Heinemann. Heinemann designed court. He's the man who designed the first motel up in San Luis Obispo. So at some point in my life, I did kind of care about architecture, as I do now again. But
So you came back, but you still weren't studying your novels in Altadena. Why did you start studying?
No, and then I moved to Atwater Village, and then I said a novel in Los Feliz, because I was living there. I said a novel in Fillmore, Piru area, because my parents lived up there, and I was enchanted by that valley. But then when I moved to Altadena, I started to use Altadena, Pasadena, La Cañada for my settings, and I thought, why not?
Well, I remember before, I don't know, 3 or 4 books ago, you thought you might set up something in Sacramento, and you went up and researched Sacramento, but then you decided it was too much work, why not write about what you know? Or
that was for my 3rd novel, Blame, and what I needed a big downtown hotel that could house a club for snooty rich people. And I thought of Boise, Idaho, and I thought of Sacramento, and it took me so long. I realize now that it's what I call a kind of a creative lag, where you're stirring, your creative juices are beginning to form and take shape, but I didn't know it at the time, and a whole year went by because I couldn't decide where to place this novel. And then one day, I remember the moment it occurred to me. I was in my backyard, and I thought, oh, why don't I place it in Pasadena with the Green Hotel? And that was that. Then I started writing.
So, to get back to the period when you were coming of age, was your family very politically aware? Because it also coincides with the time that Altadena was undergoing incredible change. Because I'm the non-fiction writer of the duo. Altadena was basically all white until in 1960, 4%. So when you were 9 or 8 or something. And then in the next decades, it changed as you were growing up. So were you very aware of that change, or how did it impact you?
I wasn't particularly that aware of it because El Nido was always very well integrated. There were already African Americans, black people living on the street. When Sidney Poitier was making Porgy and Bess in Hollywood, he was told that Altadena was a place that welcomed black people, and he lived on the corner of the street. I played with his kids. I remember his house. It's still there, very distinctly. He didn't live there long. But my parents were quite politically active, and when Pasadena was moving a lot of the urban poor out of Pasadena up to these stretches that they owned in Altadena, like up by what used to be Audubon School. One of the first things they wanted to put in next to the new housing development was a liquor store. And I remember going around with my father getting petitioned to stop the liquor store because, of course, it was 2 blocks from the school, from Audubon School. Maybe not even 2 blocks. However, our petitions failed, and the liquor store went in.
Well, that is interesting. On that corner of Altadena Drive and Lincoln, Pasadena, they grabbed a little bit of Altadena and incorporated it, and it was because they wanted to put, is it Title 10? They wanted to put their housing they had to have a certain amount of low-income housing, and so they actually grabbed a piece of Pasadena, of Altadena, to put their housing in, and that's the housing that Michelle was referring to.
And it was really the urban poor that they moved up there, and hence I suppose they thought they needed a liquor store. The whole thing was very distasteful.
So, I mean, some of your books were set like in the 70s or something, but this new book, can you tell us a little bit about that you kind of moved into more real, what people would call historical fiction, and using historical characters, which I don't think you've done before. I mean, I think you know, made a kind of a blend of people you know and your imagination to create your characters. So what is it like to actually fictionalize people who lived, even though they're not really well known? You're not writing about Abraham Lincoln, but you're writing about a family that was really well known, the Kellogg's, and also the Papineaus.
Well, I mean, this is what happens to you when you live next door to the Altadena historian. She begins to tell you stuff about your own property, and it begins to snag your creative imagination. And I did get very interested in the Papineaus and the scripts, and what was the second half of your question again? I can only...
I don't remember either. Well, what is it like to take actual people who lived and to fictionalize them?
Well, it's terrifying. You know, that creative, what would you call it, flinch that I had about where to set blame. I kind of have a creative flinch about making up stories about these people that I didn't met and whose, you know, you really don't know very much about them. Now, I know some historical fiction writers really just move into that area of not knowing with great glee and enthusiasm. I move in with a bit more trepidation.
Well, Toni Morrison famously says she doesn't like to do too much research. And even when she's writing about people or characters who were very well known, such as Emmett Till, she put in one, I haven't read the novel, but she changes the way that he dies. So she takes great license. For her, it's more how the history affected her and the culture, rather than, you know, being, you know, hidebound by facts.
I could take a page from her book.
Well, you know what? I know that you have another little excerpt, which I think would be really nice to read, and it's an example of fictionalizing a real person. And you might give a little background. It's Owen Brown's sister.
Oh, yes. I just knew a couple facts about this sister, Ruth Brown, who married a man named Thompson, so Ruth Brown Thompson. I knew that she moved to Altadena after the Civil War, and I knew she was crippled after a certain point, and I knew that when she was a child, she accidentally killed her baby sister. And so I wrote this little scene where Paul and Elena are walking. They're walking through the graveyard, such a romantic thing to do. And Elena says, "Oh, here the woodsmen are buried. And oh, here's Mrs. Thompson, Ruth Brown Thompson, 1837 to 1905, daughter of the great liberator, John Brown. Once, when I was little, my sister and I walked by her house, and Mrs. Thompson called me over. 'You, the small one, come here,' she said. She was in a wheeled chaise on her porch, and when I came up to her, she gripped my arm and asked how old I was. 7, I said. When she was around my age, she said, she took a very large pot of water off the stove to fill the wash tub, but the handle was hotter than she thought, and the pot was too heavy, and she couldn't keep hold of it. And as it slipped from her hands, the water jumped out in a wave all over her baby sister, Amelia, who was crawling on the floor. They quickly put Amelia in a cool bath. They added ice and vinegar. Her skin came off with her clothes. They smeared her with butter The doctor came, but by morning, Amelia was dead. The whole time, Mrs. Thompson was telling me this, Elena said, she gripped my arm so I couldn't pull away. She shook my arm. I should always be careful, Mrs. Thompson told me, every moment of my life. She shook it again. Pay attention, every moment. Pay attention, every moment, shape of your life. That's ghastly, Paul said, her telling you that. And when I caught up with Dot, she was laughing. Did old witch Thompson tell you about her baby sister? She tells all the kids. Poor old soul, said Paul. Poor suffering soul. She's at rest now, and I hope the story did not haunt you. Oh, but to this day, every moment I am careful. Every moment I pay attention.
From knowing two lines, just a couple of facts, you can see that fiction has a way of not just telling you what happened, but how it felt, and that combined with the research, I think, that, I mean, you've taken some real license.
Yes, the first time Michelle heard this, she said, you know, Ruth Thompson wasn't really like that. That's what I'm afraid of.
But still, it really, I mean, something as horrific as that, to read it in a history book is one thing, but to read a scene in a novel makes it very different. So I wondered, how do you use a known landscape in your fiction? A landscape, not people now. Do you feel constrained by reality? If not, like, how do you fictionalize a place? How do you fictionalize Altadena?
Well, when I was writing my fifth novel, Search, which is about a church search committee at a church, I placed the church in Altadena. What I did was I took those county streets and I stretched them and I stuck in a new county street called Stanislaus Street that's completely fictional, and I put my church there. And it kind of plays a little bit off the Theosophical Society. I kind of thought about that area. That's how I imagined it. But
What about the neighborhood church?
In Pasadena?
Yeah, was that part?
Well, no, I didn't want to use that at all. I didn't want to get anywhere near that. I wanted my own church with my own people, which I assiduously made up. I had dossiers on each of the characters. I knew nothing about the search committee that had happened at neighborhood church. However, I got in trouble nevertheless. So, there you go.
Happens when you start fictionalizing. So, but what qualities do you ascribe to Altadena in your books? What meanings does it carry for you? Like, what does it mean to you? What do you think it means to your characters?
That's a good question. In my third novel, Blame, this is about a woman who does a terrible thing. She's a terrible alcoholic, and she's in a 2-day blackout, and she's driving her big Mercedes-Benz home, and she doesn't see the 2 Jehovah's Witnesses in her driveway, and it's a steep driveway. She has this big heavy car, and it jumps when she hits the gas, and she manages to kill this mother and daughter Jehovah's Witnesses, and she has to go to prison. And she's living in Altadena at the time. She has a little house, again, on a fictional street called Pomelo Street. It was her first home. She's a professor, and she has to sell it and go to prison. She goes to prison and she has to give it up, and then she has this whole long life, the life of a guilty person. She goes to prison for a few years. She marries an older, wealthy man in La Cañada, and has an okay life up to a point, and that point is when she finds out, and this is not a spoiler because it's on the book cover. She finds out that she was not driving the car when it happened. This is 22 years after after the incident.
This is the novel called Blame.
This is a novel called Blame, yes. And so, you know, she has to do this whole life review. She has to reevaluate everything in the last 20 years, the decision not to have children, the decision to marry this older man who's sort of a big honcho in AA. And ultimately, she goes home to Altadena because Altadena to her is home and refuge and herself. And that was really autobiographical for me because when I was looking for a house in 2000 to 2001, I looked from Monrovia to Santa Monica. And Michelle and Mark were already living in Altadena, and they said, well, there's this ugly little house on a big, beautiful piece of property. And it took me 6 months to make a decision, but I bought it. And my hesitation was largely that I thought I would be hit by nostalgia and by these bittersweet memories, you know, sort of painful, bittersweet memories of my mother who had passed and other friends, and just some time gone by. But instead, what happened is that I sort of felt very integrated. I felt like my past and my future came together. I had my own home that I could decorate the way I wanted. I had a friend next door. It was really a profound homecoming. And so I have that sense about Altadena. And it seeps into my books, I'm sure.
So, you're considered a literary novelist rather than a genre fiction writer, but it seems that your work has become subtly but increasingly accessible to a wider range of readers. But you haven't lost your literary cred, I don't think. You haven't. So could you talk a little bit about that and that process?
Sure. When I was first learning to be a writer, I studied under a writer named John Keeble, and if you think my first novel is clotted, you should read his early work. There's something really wonderful about writing the densest prose you can imagine, highly descriptive, can't pry it apart with a knife. It was just kind of what I was taught and what I was taught to like. And over time, I realized that I didn't really like it. I like writers. I really loved the writer Alice Munro because she could dance through time. She just swerves and leaps and takes all sorts of liberties with time, and she's very fleet of foot. A lot of people say she has no style, but her style is invisible, highly effective style. And that was a big influence on me, to be able to write more fluidly and tell the story more swiftly. And also, who doesn't want readers? I mean, why write unless, you know, you want to be read?
I agree. So if you're going to rejigger and work the landscape and change a bunch of stuff anyhow, why even use a real place like Altadena or real people? Like, that kind of comes into it when you move into the realm of historical fiction.
Right. Well, familiarity comes to mind. Also, just having a little germ of something. When I teach at UCLA, I have my students write all the time. They have to write every single week. And I give them a prompt every single week. And it's a simple prompt. You know, write about a love story with a bad ending. Write about a love story with a good ending. Write about a sibling that you never had. That was a prompt that actually prompted my book, Bug Hollow. A little germ, a little seed that can then grow into something. It's like when you tell a kid, oh, go draw a picture. They don't know what to do, but if you say, draw me a monster, they'll go to town. It's just that little tiny bit of an idea that can get you started. So that's why I like to use familiar things. And also, because of the depth of feeling that you have, I mean, I guess that's also familiarity. The depth of feeling you have about a place, it's easier to have a greater depth of feeling about something if you actually have a depth of feeling about something.
Well, we're going to move into a few questions pretty soon, but I just wanted to ask a couple more things. And so you guys be thinking of questions you might like to ask Michelle. So you've taught creative writing at UCLA for 20 years. Can you kind of speak broadly about how America's literary landscape and writing has been shifting in that time? And like, what about the role of identity politics, and how has that affected the kinds of students and what the, you know, your classroom?
Well, there has always been marvelous diversity in my classrooms. There's something about creative writing that attracts a really broad swath of students. And, you know, as for identities, I mean, I would look at these students and wonder, you know, who are you? Where did you come from? I remember I had this student who was half Japanese, a quarter from Guam, and a quarter Mexican. They're already, you know, a melting pot. It's really
Sounds like Altadena.
It sounds like Altadena. And also, you know, UCLA has a big feeder from junior colleges. And a lot of junior colleges have wonderful creative writing programs. So my students all had to apply to get into my classes. So it's no surprise that I had a lot of students from like San Antonio College, Pasadena College, Glendale College, junior colleges from all over the Southland. And that tended to be a really diverse group. So when things got sort of more intense about diversity, it didn't affect me whatsoever. I was already there. UCLA is already pretty much there, I think.
So before we get to audience questions, I was wondering that, let's say you hadn't moved to Altadena, but you moved to Echo Park, do you think all of your novels would be set there?
I wonder. I wouldn't have moved next door to the Echo Park historian, or it's unlikely that I would have. You know, it's an interesting question. An alternate life. Maybe I'll write an Echo Park novel since I've lived there since the fire, more or less, but I doubt it because I've got enough work to do in Altadena.
Okay. Well, I wonder, did we have any audience questions? Please, oh, Larry Wilson.
How far up Lake Avenue was the Altadena Hospital? What was the intersection there?
Well, let me repeat the question. How far up Lake was the Altadena Hospital? It's been gone for years. This is where Michelle was born.
In fact, it was not on Lake, and it might not even be in Altadena, but it was called the Altadena Hospital, and it was south of Woodbury on the right side of the street. It became a health center for years.
It's on Fair Oaks, I think.
It's on, what did I say?
Yeah.
Oh, Fair Oaks, yeah, it's on Fair Oaks.
So
Yeah, it was a small
So
hospital.
it was in Pasadena, probably.
Yeah, I think it
But
was.
they called it the Altadena Hospital.
Yes.
Well, you know, Pasadena has nibbled in 48 little bites, pieces of Altadena. So things that were formerly Altadena became Pasadena. So it must have been in Altadena, otherwise why would they call it the Altadena Hospital?
But you have it cooler than the rest of us, because I always, since my parents lived in Altadena when I was born, I say I was born in Altadena. But of course I was born in Huntington. But you know, they took me home to Altadena. But you can actually pretend, say, that you were born in Altadena.
I know, I just filled out a form for global entry, and it said the city of your birth, and I wrote Pasadena, Altadena, Pasadena, Altadena. I couldn't decide which was right. I decided Altadena because that's where I went home.
Jim,
We'll get a piece of your book by the cake back there. What do you hope readers get from reading Buck Hope?
let me repeat the question. What does Michelle hope readers will get from reading her novel?
Bug Hollow, now out in paperback as of yesterday, and
A different cover.
a limited number of copies for sale at 3/4 price in the back there. What do I hope? You know what I hope? I hope they get literary pleasure out of it. The great, enormous pleasure of reading a good book. I can only hope that that's what they get out of it. I hope they get some conversation with friends about it too, because the other great pleasure in life is talking about books. Reading books, talking about books. That's why I'm a writer and a reader.
And so, what about AI? I don't know, why would people use AI if they wanted to be a writer? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, because as I face these little, I wouldn't call them writer blocks, but writer stalls, I think, oh, it would be so tempting. And I recently visited a friend up north who had written a little article. And then she's a published, she writes for the New York Times and stuff, and she had put it in AI and said, make it a little bit funnier. And she said it did. And she gave it to me, and I systematically pulled out every single one of the little lines that were funnier because they were not her lines, and I could tell. But it was funnier. So the temptation is kind of great. You know, you read about writers now who say, they say, AI, give me a first draft of a story about Paul Popado in Altadena. And I resist, because that's not why I write, and it's not how I write, and it's not what writing is to me, which is one person's consciousness talking to another person's consciousness. AI is not a consciousness.
Are there some other, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to pursue a question that Michelle on the right asked you before, which has to do with the historical setting in which your novel is set. So the one you're working on now is set in 1910, right? How much in the way of historical research do you do to make sure that you're not violating, you know, the chronology or what happened in 1910 that people are familiar with or in their lifetime?
Let me repeat the question. Lewis, a historian, is asking how much research Michelle does just to make sure that she's not violating, you know, she's being ahistorical. Like, how much is enough for you? How much is too much?
It depends on how terrified I am. For the next chapter of this book, I've written a couple chapters that are much further on in the book, but for the next chapter, Paul goes to Algiers in Algeria in 1911. I've been researching it for months and months, because the whole thing is intimidating to me. And I want to know it so well that it comes out digested and accurate. Because, you know, there's a whole spate of readers out there, and I've met them, who read a book and play gotcha with it. For example, I was in a book group I was talking to a book group once on Zoom, and each member of the book group came up and asked a question or said something. And this one woman came up and said about my novel Blame, she said, "You mentioned the California Conservation Corps." And I said, "Yeah, I did." She said, "It's the Civilian Conservation Corps." And I said, "Oh, I actually think it's the California Conservation Corps." And she said, no, I looked it up. And that was her entire response to my book.
Gotcha.
It's both. There is a California Conservation Corps.
Front?
I'm just wondering character in your book?
The question is, do you ever put yourself as a character in the book?
They're all me. But some are more me than others. Dana in Search, who's the kind of the narrator and the point of view in Search, has a lot of things in common with me, although she, I think, is less ethical than I am. She joins the search committee in order to get a book out of it, secretly, so that's a little dicey.
Do you ever put your friends in your books?
Oh, yes. Michelle is in my book. She's Tilly in my book, Off Course, and that's a pretty autobiographical book, but I wrote it very autobiographically, and then it was really boring, so I had to go back and add a lot of drama.
Some more questions? Hans?
I'm curious, are there any writers who you deeply respect as writers, but their work doesn't resonate with you?
The question, are there any writers you deeply respect as writers and yet it doesn't resonate with you, so you mean that you're not influenced by them but you love to read them? Is that?
Or that they're not an influence on me, but I love them.
Yeah.
Well, there are many I wish were a greater influence on me. Tolstoy, Chekhov, Shakespeare. I don't know if you can control what you absorb that much. But it's a good question. Let me think about it and get back to you on that.
Yeah, you're unconscious. You know, what is the role of the unconscious in writing?
I mean, like, I think Mark Twain is incredibly hilarious, and I deeply admire him, but I don't write like him, for example.
Lisa, or no, yeah, Lisa and then.
So I don't know if I missed something, but the part that you read about Bruce Brown and the boiling water of the baby sister, is that fictionalized?
How much did you fictionalize the Ruth Thompson killing her baby sister?
She did kill her by pulling a pot of water off the stove that she couldn't handle. I did not fictionalize that. I did fictionalize that as an older woman, you know, that she brought the children, called the children to her and told them that story. So I fictionalized the context in which the story is told.
You must always be careful.
Yes. And that was to lend character to that person in the plot?
Yes, it was to help Elena's character and how to kind of give you a glimpse of how she thinks and who she is.
Yeah, what impact did that have? She said, I've always been careful ever since. I'm always careful, and she could trace it back. We all have things that happened, right, that we remember.
Yeah, she has a very sensitive, present artistic sensibility, and that's one of the bricks that helped build it.
Meredith, you had a question?
Do you ever think of your books as turning into plays, or like, you know, vision? This would be an interesting actor or actress, or you know, just kind of wondering where that goes.
Meredith's question is, does Michelle ever think of turning her book into a play or a movie, or imagine which actor or should play the part?
You know, I used to. My very first book, Round Rock, was bought by Helen Hunt when she got her first production company. It was the first thing she acquired. And I met with her and she actually said, who do you imagine playing Libby and who do you imagine playing Red Ray? And she sent it out to be written by a screenwriter, and that was the end of that. You know, a lot of things don't go anywhere in Hollywood, but it was sort of fun, and I guess I did that with a couple novels. Now I don't think that way anymore. I sometimes think about Bug Hollow because it's got 10 chapters that take place over 40 years, and I think it might make an interesting TV series. I mean, I love episodic TV, It's sort of taken over, it's the narrative that we indulge in now, where people used to indulge more in novels. Now they indulge in episodic TV. And I think it's funny because I know even very experimental novelists who eschew plot and character for God knows what, will watch and love episodic TV. We love stories. We're humans. We love stories.
Okay, Janet.
You mentioned that you got into a little bit of trouble with the neighborhood church on your novel search. How did that play out?
Janet asked that Michelle referenced she got into a little trouble with the neighborhood church. How did that play out?
I didn't particularly get into trouble myself, but the rumor got out that I had been on a search committee and that I was telling stories out of school. And the, you know, like I would read on Facebook that people, like a minister in Illinois said, well, I'm not going to read the book because I heard she was on a search committee and just used all of that to, so I guess saying I was in trouble is a little bit wrong, but rumors circulated, shall we say.
Yes.
Hi, I read your novel Search and I loved it, but I really want to hear a little bit about your food writing, which you haven't really covered here, but I think that's how I first was introduced to you, by your articles in the Los Angeles Times.
Okay, food, Michelle and food writing.
And then we'll cut cake.
Yeah. That's the last question.
Thank you for that question. When I was a wannabe novelist, I needed to work, and I started doing journalism. I started doing investigative journalism for California Magazine, and the food writer Jonathan Gold was the restaurant reviewer there. And here I am doing deep research into these articles, and then Jonathan swinging into the office with a bag that smells like truffles, you know, and sitting down and writing something, and I thought, I want to do that. And I made myself known that I wanted to do it, and California let me do a few pieces, and then Ruth Reichel hired me at the LA Times, and I did it for 15 years. It's a really good job for a writer because it makes you get out of the house, it makes you be sociable because you have to bring a friend, and it gets you fed, and it pays you. So not a bad gig, although by the end of it I was a little bit tired, although I still write about food. Every few months I'll write a piece for the LA Times about food. I love writing about food.
And Search was a memoir with recipes. We should adjourn, I think, or eat cake. But I want to say that to be a friend of a food writer is wonderful, because one of the most wonderful things, one time or twice, once I went to Ireland with Michelle to cook, and once to, not Sicily, Corsica, right? Because all I had to do was pay for the plane ticket, and then we went and cooked in these places.
But I also want to say that Michelle is one of the very best cooks I know, and I credit her for a lot of my interest in food because she is fearless. She cooks Thai food, she cooks Persian food, she cooks anything that comes her way. Her Indian food, she taught me how to cook Indian food. So, I mean, I don't think I would be the writer I am without my friendship with Michelle.
First slice.
Okay.